I'm really excited to be here with you today. This is a really cool opportunity, and it seems like a really neat initiative for your school to be putting on for you to be really focusing on this area of wellness. It's probably one of my favorite topics because I think in this season of my own life, I know how significant it is for me, and it's an area that I talk about essentially every single day. With my clients, just because it's so significant for everything that we're doing. So I think it's just really significant in this period of time when we're all have different struggles, but the world's not getting any easier to live in, right? So just looking at how each of us individually have a method for our own wellness that's somewhat different from each other, but there's a lot of common areas there as well. So it's just a fact that the more that you're going to be in a people-focused profession, that people take a lot. People will take whatever you give to them. And so whenever you're in any kind of people-focused profession, it's that much more significant that you know how to maintain your own health in order that you continually are replenishing. That's what is needed. So a couple of things I think are important right off the bat. Health is definitely on a spectrum. It's not that there are perfectly healthy people and perfectly unhealthy people. That's not true in any way. Our own level of health shifts all the time. So we're really looking for ways to stay healthy, but also recognizing that when you know yourself and you know what helps you to be healthy, you also recognize when something shifts. Like even just yesterday, as an example, I worked yesterday. It was a really good day. Came home feeling really good, no stress really. And then I was laying down in bed with my 6-year-old when she came home from school, reading, not overly stressful, and I could just feel this sense of stress creeping up my back, in the back of my head. That's how I know, more than like, oh, I'm feeling stressed. I know it because my body is telling me there's a stress reaction there. So it's not really that the activity with her was stressful at all. It wasn't. But instantly I recognized when that was there, okay, I'm on a timeline now for picking up the other kids, getting to tutoring, dropping off supper for somebody, getting to Awana. Like it was like that instantly I was in that rhythm of all that was coming. And it was actually stealing from that present moment that I was in. And I had to figure out how to backtrack back into a place to get into a very present moment again. And that's just one time in one day. And we're always doing that. Like that spectrum is like of perfect health. I've never been perfectly healthy in everything in my life. I'm generally also not perfectly unhealthy, but we're fluctuating all the time and trying to find measures to stay very healthy, but recognizing things affect us every day that change our level of health. The second thing I think is really significant is that people appear much healthier predominantly than they really are. We're pretty good at putting on the facade of health or appearing healthy, when in reality we've got quite a few layers of things that are going on under the surface that we may be aware of or we may not be aware of, but we're not usually super quick to be showing everybody around us. The church, ministry, this is probably an area that has created a lot of suffering in the past. We're definitely getting better. Even this initiative is a method of doing better here. But the fact is that we've been good at we're fine. Everything's fine. How are you? I'm good. We're always good, right? Everybody? Always good. That's our answer, right? But the reality is that there's so many levels to how we're actually doing emotionally, physically, spiritually, that we actually have to figure out first how to become a little more honest with ourselves to see what's actually going on. And in particular, I feel like for you in this brand new year, some of you are finishing your degrees. Some of you are just starting. You're all in different places. But you being here, this isn't even about training for your job, right? Most of you are going to have a career or something coming out of this. But this is actually way more about your own formation than it is about the career that you're going into as far as how you're going to help people or what you're going to go do. This is probably the best season of your whole life, probably, to actually be looking at what have I come into this with? Where am I currently in my life? What are my levels of health versus my levels of struggle? And is there a better season than right now to actually be addressing those things? You should be in a really safe place and developing some practices so that this can actually be much more about your formation than actually what you're going to go do when you leave here. So that's my hope anyways. And my hope, I think, is also as a body, for this school, in the church in general, that we're using this season when we're now, we're getting bolder about the fact that we really have to focus on health. We have to look at things very openly, and that we actually are going to require a different level of health for ourselves, like recognizing that it's possible to be very healthy and to acknowledge areas that we're not, because we can't really do that for other people if we're not first doing it internally for ourselves. Something that I just want you to think about is just this level of introspection that is necessary for being healthy. What I mean by that is simply like introspection, just the ability to examine and be observant of where you are, of your own health. It's like a level of intimacy with yourself. You know, we often think about intimacy as far as like in relationship with other people, but the fact of the matter is, first, we have to be able to look into ourselves to see where we are before we're going to be able to do that for other people. But actually, you probably can. Like, you probably have someone in your life that is pretty good at like knowing you, right? Like a friend or someone that they know you pretty well, so they know when you're off, or they might know something about you before you quite know it about yourself. Does that feel pretty true? Like, I have someone in Moncton. She's 70. She's become sort of like a family member to us. Every time I go to her house and I tell her something about myself, she says, I know. I know. And she just can see this stuff in me, sometimes before I recognize it in myself. And one part of really getting to a healthy spot is just learning to be very vulnerable with who we are, that we look inside ourselves very carefully to see where we are struggling, where we might feel really isolated from other people, or we might just feel really lonely or insecure. Because when we actually start to look at these areas, there are answers to those things. There are ways that we can actually start to have different measures of health as long as we're actually being aware of what's affecting us. One of the questions that I ask clients more often than anything else, and they have a really hard time answering, is what do you need? It's a pretty basic question, right? What do you need? That question is actually very difficult for people to answer. It shouldn't be, really, but people are like, oh, I've never really thought about that. Or it's been a long time since I've thought about that. And the reality is that no one wants to be needy, right? Like, it's not really attractive to be needy. But we all have a significant level of needs that if we're not aware of them or accessing those things, we play them out, right? Either internally or externally. Those things get acted out around us, so we don't always have a way to voice what those things are. I remember this one time about 6 years ago. I think I was on mat leave, so I had a baby, 2-year-old, 4-year-old. And my husband and I grew up in very different homes. Like, my home was like we might eat supper at 8 o'clock at night. We might play a board game later. We might leave the dishes till tomorrow. Like, very laid back. We'll just take it as it comes. My husband grew up in we have a housekeeper and every pillow is perfectly straight kind of house. So our match there hasn't been perfect. And in this season of our life, having 3 little kids, it was a Friday night. He was coming home. I was trying to get supper ready. The house was a disaster. I really didn't care. But he'd been coming home with kind of a sour attitude for some time of the like, ugh, I don't like this house. And that night in particular, because I was getting frustrated with his attitude, I said, Justin, what do you need? And he said, I just can't relax when the house is like this. And as soon as I heard his need, rather than it being an attack on me, I just said, okay, that's fine. So I stopped cooking supper. The two of us cleaned up the house for like half an hour. And he went, ah. Like, he just was able to, like, this is a Friday night. And now I can come home to my family. And now we're fine. And the thing is that most people, while that's just like one little avenue, we all have so many areas of need. And there are so many emotional needs that we have that we don't always have access to because we don't even know the language to be able to access. Yes, that's so true for me. Once we get that and we can actually start voicing it to ourselves and other people, the ability to become healthy is so significantly different as long as you're in healthy relationships that someone can hear your need and actually help to address that for you. It changes significantly. So every one of us, me, you, we all have a rhythm of health. I don't know if you've ever thought of that way before, But we have a rhythm of health. We have a rhythm in different seasons of our life, depending on where we are, that will work for us or it works against us. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes. I just want you to think about that, though, because there's 5 main areas of health that are really significant that we need to actually be actively working out. What is the rhythm that actually works for me in these areas? And when it comes to self-care, our self-care will be as good as our ability to connect these 5 areas. Because when one area is not taken care of, we won't be doing well. So these areas, that's the way I see them: spiritual health, mental health, emotional health, physical health, and relational health. Those are the 5 areas that they are very much connected to one another. They're distinct, but they matter significantly for what we do in each of those areas in order to be healthy. So spiritual health, I know you had a pastor here yesterday, so I'm sure that we kind of covered this area a lot. I won't spend too much time here, but the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of people who are in ministry or who have a wonderful relationship with the Lord, that their souls are still not nurtured very well. There's a lot of people that we are not figuring out well how to nurture our souls in order to go through the demands of life and come out healthy. Remember earlier I said there's an illusion of health, right? We can look very healthy and not actually be overly healthy. I've been both before, lots of times over. I know what it's like to be very healthy, and I know what it's like to present as very healthy when I'm actually not doing that well inside, when I'm not actually doing the things I need to do to nurture my own soul. When we're talking about spiritual health, we're talking about our sense of worth, our sense of identity, where we receive validation, who our dependency is on, whether it's on ourselves or on the Lord. We're also talking about how we use our time. Are we living slowly enough to actually be in the Word and receiving truth continually over our life? Are we living slowly enough to allow the Holy Spirit to be communicating things to us that we need? Are we taking Sabbath time to both live slowly and just to refuel? Even if it means like having time to laugh with your friends, and like not be serious and things not always matter so much. These things all really matter. Emotional health, I already kind of touched on. But one area that I feel like is also really significant is the area of emotional intelligence. This is in a lot of ways, not entirely, but in some ways it is a gender issue. And I don't mean to be offensive in any way. That's not my heart in any way on this. But women do have a different level of emotional intelligence predominantly. By the time that babies are born and like when they're 18 months old, little girls are like playing house and like figuring out how to organize people and how to do relationships, and that's there from the time that they're tiny, whereas boys are like, fixing things and like totally doing a different genre of activities. And men haven't been taught in the same way how to be acceptant of their emotions, how to process things. That is definitely shifting, and studies are producing evidence that more and more men are developing emotional intelligence, which is a beautiful thing, but we need more and more of that, especially for men who are going to be in ministry and leading people, that they need first to be able to recognize for themselves the things that they're struggling with and dealing with emotionally, so that they also can be in tune for other people. But it starts first internally, recognizing what your emotional needs are, how they are met, and what that looks like moving forward. So that is a big area, and it's a skill. It's not something that you either have or you don't have. Women come with it a little more naturally from the time that they're tiny. Not all, but that's just a generalization. But it's a skill. It's something that, like anything else, we have a lot of access to resources now, that if it's something that you want more of, you can get more of it. And so it's right there for us. Third area, mental health. Mental health and emotional health are not the same thing. Our emotions, come from our heart, from the way we feel. Our mental health is more a state of our mind, how healthy our mind is. And with what we're dealing with now, with very high levels of anxiety and stress, high levels of depression, suicidal ideation and action, this is very significant both in the church and outside the church, that we actually really need to be focusing on how to be renewing our mind constantly, Satan is working overtime against us, and our mind is one of the primary ways that he's attacking and bringing strongholds against us. And it's a very isolated realm of life, right? Like if you have a physical ailment, often people can see it and walk with you in it. But because our mind, we're so isolated in it that unless we're actually communicating with people what our struggle is, often we can do we're fine, I'm good, when in reality, we're really struggling internally. And so the ability to renew our mind is such a constant need. This is the major connection with spiritual health in a lot of ways, because the Bible is our source of truth, which is what our mind needs to be centered on truth all the time, and lining up every thought, every feeling we have, willing to hold it up, but not necessarily to give it authority over everything else. When we use the Bible as our source of authority over everything that we experience. So that's a really huge need. Fourth, physical health. There's a really high connection between the way our brain works and the way we care for our physical bodies. I, like most people, have really healthy practices sometimes and very much a laissez-faire approach sometimes, depending on the season. But what I've noticed is that, when you're a little bit younger and you have a little more energy and maybe slightly less responsibilities, this isn't quite as high of a need as it's going to become in other parts of your life. And we actually have to learn how to put a really strong, we need to make this like a really high priority for us over time. The things you eat actually does matter because it produces energy and it produces a healthy body or not. There's a really cool podcast by Craig Groeschel. I don't know how to say his name. It's the art of energy management, and it's really, really neat. He's a little bit on the nerdy side, he studies things so specifically, but it's really, really cool. So he's been on this study for the last 9 years of the specific things he eats and the specific way it affects his body. So he's very intense, but it's very, very neat. Because he's right, that the things we do as far as the things we put into our body, how we use our body, the way we sleep, all those things, it has a huge significance on what we actually can produce in terms of energy. Time doesn't change, but the amount of energy we have changes significantly depending on how we actually use our physical realm. So that's really neat. I would check that out if I were you. But those things, they will matter more and more over time. And so even now, to be producing healthy practices is really significant for you. And lastly, relational health. I mean, we all know how important people are, right? People can break us or seemingly break us. People encourage us and build us up. People matter in every realm of life. No matter what people come to me for, people are always a part of it. The relationships are never absent from what we talk about. And some of you, I'm sure, have come from really healthy families. And some of you, I'm sure, have come from fairly dysfunctional families. And some of you have come from somewhere in between. And, if you're lucky that you've had people really intentionally teach you how to have really healthy relationships, you should probably go thank them soon. Because most of us actually haven't had enough education on how to have really healthy relationships with people. And some of the relationships you're going to form here, some of these people will be your lifelong friends, and that you're in that stage where these people are really going to matter for the rest of your life. And so how you do relationships, how people experience you, the more aware you are of how people experience you and adjust accordingly if needed, or how you experience other people, that's a really significant area. Boundaries. This is one of my favorite words to talk to people because it matters so much that, when you serve people and you're in people-focused relationships where you're giving so much of your life away, it's really easy to give too much of your life away and not know where that line is that says, I still have to be a really healthy, functional person, so I can't give it all away and do that, or not have a way of replenishing continually. I had this time quite a number of years ago now, but I was working with a couple that was very chronically, just a lot of toxicity in their relationship, and things were never really getting that much better. And I was lying in bed with my husband that night reading my most favorite book, Keep Your Love On. If you guys have not read this book, Keep Your Love On by Danny Silk, you should all go order it today and start reading it right away. It's one of the few books I've ever read over and over again because it's actually that good. It's on like how to significantly connect with people, how to communicate effectively, how to set good boundaries, how to be a powerful person in relationships. So I was reading that book and checking my work emails, and my husband and I had just decided we'd go on a date the next night. And then I got a work email from this couple, and they needed to see me. And so because like in ministry, you'll often work with people whose needs appear significantly higher than your own needs. It's really hard to not give yourself away. Like I didn't really have to go on a date that night with my husband, like we were still gonna be fine. We're still gonna be married if we didn't go on that date. So I quickly went, oh, sorry, I'm not gonna be able to go. This couple needs me. It's the only time I can see them. So I just, emailed them back. Okay, fine, I'll come and see you. And my husband just kind of gave me that look like, oh my word. So anyways, I went back to reading my book, Keep Your Love On. And literally the next page, or maybe it was that page, I don't remember. The next thing I read that the Lord highlighted like times 10 for me, it said, ministry should never come before family. Ministry should never come before family. And I was like, okay. So I emailed them back and said, sorry, can't go tomorrow night. And instead it was like, this actually has to happen. Just because you will be fine without the next self-care type thing you do, or the next way you nurture your relationships, you actually have to make that a huge priority, even when you don't feel like it has to be a huge priority. Even when you're going to be fine without the next little thing, it has to be that significant because we have to secure that we're going to have resources to keep being able to pour out. And our health demands it. There's way too much burnout, way too much problems in the church that if we aren't first taking care of ourselves, we won't be able to keep going. So the last thing I just want to go back to is just that rhythm of health. So counselors do less teaching than asking questions. Right? That's what we do. We ask questions in order to help people figure out their own life. So I just want to ask you a number of questions. I'm sure these are not all going to resonate with every one of you, but if there are 2 or 3 questions that you take, and whether the Lord just kind of convicts you a little bit or asks you to consider this a little more, just use these as things that you can just go and consider when you look at how healthy and how the practices that you're using. So do you recognize your own health as well as your areas of struggle? If I yesterday hadn't recognized what my body had felt like before that stress came on me, I would not have recognized, okay, I better do something about this, like readjust slightly. If I lived in chronic stress all the time, I wouldn't know what it looks like to actually feel okay. So we actually have to learn what it looks like to feel rested, to know what it's like when we have stress and when we don't, or when we're feeling anxious and then we aren't, in order to be able to be in a better spot. Do you know what you're in need of in this season of your life? What do you need? What do your needs look like? How hard can you push yourself and stay healthy? We're getting pretty good at pushing ourselves and not so good at staying healthy on the other end. And that's a very fine line. You've got to figure out individually what that looks like. How much sleep do you need? College students who think you don't need any. How much do you need to actually stay healthy? What is your regular rhythm that enhances your overall well-being? This might not be something you've really put a lot of thought into, but if it isn't, it's probably about time. Because this season is one where you can be empowered and growing in strength. And in other seasons, when you might have a full-time job and a lot of other responsibilities, it's just going to get tried from that point forward. So figuring out what your rhythm looks like is really important. And figuring out what your diet consists of. And I don't mean your food diet necessarily. That's just one tiny part of your actual diet, right? Like what we consume for food it does matter. But I mean more than that. What is your diet of rest, of food, of actually getting fresh air, of breathing deeply, of living rested, like here, of exercising, of what you're reading, what you're viewing, what you're hearing, who you're interacting with, how you're using social media. Like this is what a diet actually looks like. And this is training ground here, that it really matters how you're using your time and how these things are coming into connection for you. And so my hope for you would be that this is a really safe place this year, that you can actually slow down enough that as you're learning and you're growing for what you're going to do outside, that you're also using this time to really see what you're in need of, what you might have come in here with as far as past hurts or past experiences, that actually there'd be enough space here to deal with those things and to be open with them, with people around you, not necessarily everyone, but with your safe people. And even as a school, that I can tell the priority here, or this wouldn't be happening. But even after today, what does this look like, to have some form of organization every few weeks or something that you're actually, in groups talking about your health and how you're pursuing health and what practices you're using. So I hope this will just be a jumping off point for where you keep going. And thanks for having me, and let me share a few things here with you.